The weary traveler draws close to the end of the path.
We have never had it so good.
All of this just works.
We are selling tea to China.
You did not have to redeem this, ma'am!
Out with them, forget about them.
Your broadcast is very biased. You've written a lot of ridiculous articles, so I would encourage you to be more journalistic and have more integrity.
Socialism is when the government does stuff.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse, the weekly show for the sensible centrist. Ludwig Path, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Good day and good evening, viewers. As promised last time, we have Reactionary Reading Law back again with us. It's been a while, hasn't it? How are you doing, Mr. Sir?
I'm doing okay. I'm a bit of a busy bunny at the moment. I got my exam results for the bar today. Did well, so over the moon a bit, but you know.
That's very good. Congratulations.
Congratulations. That's great. So yeah, we're going to spend most of the stream talking about your book, but as usual, we need some a little bit of warm up as people come in to the door. And Walrus, you recently had the perfect storm on Twitter, posting fake news about the American border control.
I did. I got in first, you know, on pulling the slot machine and got rewarded. What happened is that I read an article from a regional newspaper in Norway about some guy who ostensibly, you know, was turned around at the Newark border control, which is in New Jersey when you land, and usually when you fly from Europe to New York, you land in New Jersey because it's cheaper. And part of the article was that, you know, sort of the way it was written, the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were, in the case of this guy, was the ICE agents finding, you know, memes of JD Vance on his phone that allegedly weren't even his. There were some sent by a friend of him, but we'll get into that. And so I thinking it was funny, I shared a screenshot from the article of him holding the JD Vance edit, and said that this guy got detained by ICE at Newark. And then I also went through the work of translating the article for anyone who wanted to read it. And it's, as they say, kind of blew up. Right now it's sitting at 5.2 million views. It got picked up by bigger accounts. I forget his name, the Vatnik Soup guy, picked it up because reposting is for nerds who don't want to win at Twitter. You have to steal content. That's the way you do it. I understand it. You know, hate the player, not hit the game, not the player.
That guy's getting called out here. I think he's like way above us in terms of viewership, but
I don't care.
Pretty
I'm doing it for the love of the game, and this, you know, that's kind of this tweet as well is, quote unquote, I did a fake news, as I said, because it's not entirely correct. If you read the article, it's more that he was already detained, and part of the reason that they were, you know, becoming more and more suspicious of him was finding the JD Vance meme, which ostensibly they labeled as right wing, but we'll get back to that later. So, you know, this got picked up by a lot of people, and it went quite viral. So we're going to have to do a bit of a follow-up on this. I'm going to read through the original article, and then we'll do an article and a half, a follow-up that gives some more information about this, because it's been thrown around like what is facts, what is true, you know, all of that stuff, what actually happened. And of course, this is a type of article as well originally that, you know, this thing was never meant to reach the levels of attention that it got. This was supposed to be, you know, oh, look what happened to this poor guy, right? Whatever, the Americans are weird kind of thing. And and yeah, it got really big. So, of course, we have an actual lawyer with us tonight. So, if there's any legal advice you can provide here, we'll be glad to have any. So, I'm just going to read from my original translation of the original article that started it all. Also, my mentions are full of people astonished that the name of this guy is Mads Mikkelsen, because there's only allowed to be one. Like, Americans thinking that, you know, there can't possibly be two persons in Norway named Mads Mikkelsen.
They're referring to the Danish actor
Exactly,
who plays in James Bond. I think that's the famous role that he has, because he's been
Le Chiffre, yeah.
They've been doing this sort of Chud Jack or Le Chiffre memes with the nothing ever happens guys. all in or nothing ever happens.
Cyber Ninja Zero says, I'm sorry you have to spend 10,000 years in prison for defamation. Yeah, I'm never getting into the Americans again. It's over for me.
So yeah, that bridge is burned, but at least we can be truthful.
Exactly. Mads from Tromsø reacts strongly to the treatment that he received from U.S. border control upon entering the USA. What was supposed to be a 2-month vacation in the United States turned into a nightmare for 21-year-old Mads Mikkelsen from Tromsø. Already at the airport in Newark, New Jersey, he was stopped by immigration authorities, placed in a cell, and subjected to what he describes as harassment and abuse of power. Now, last time I was in the US was probably like 12 years ago, at least, if not even more, 15 maybe. But I do remember even then, compared to, you know, traveling around Europe, the border control in the US is, you know, a bit more draconian than most. You have to like memorize, you know, what hotel you're staying at and where you're going, and tell them all about it. It's a very strange thing. You would think that, you know, the land of the free, they don't care where you go, but obviously, you know, I understand they have to enforce their borders. So he was stopped by, it describes as a harassment and abuse of power. The journey began on Wednesday, June 11th. He arrived in the US with his travel plans ready. First, he was to visit a female friend who lives in New York, then continue on to Austin, Texas to visit other friends. And he had also planned to travel around several national parks with his mother, who was to arrive a few weeks later. And I've seen a photo of him with his mom, and his mom has a uniform that belongs to like tour guides and tour leaders or hiking leaders of like the Norwegian Hiking Society. So it lends some credibility to the fact that actually, you know, this guy might be interested in nature and hiking, because his mom definitely is. This didn't happen. Mikkelsen's dream trip to the States came to an abrupt end before he even had the chance to begin his vacation. When he arrived at the Newark airport, he was quickly pulled aside by ICE agents. Quote, I felt prejudged, treated with suspicion, and simply humiliated already at that point in front of many other people at the airport. They took me to a room with several armed guards where I had to hand over my shoes, phone, and backpack. Then airport personnel began asking questions. Some were general inquiries about his travel itinerary and plans for his stay. Suddenly, several of the questions became very direct and personal, according to him. Quote, they asked direct questions about drug smuggling, terrorist plans, and right-wing extremism, completely without bias. They demanded full information about everyone I was going to meet in the US, including names, addresses, phone numbers, and their occupations. Already exhausted from little sleep the night before and the departure and a long flight, Mikkelsen says answering such questions took quite a toll. Quote, I had traveled for 12 hours, slept poorly, and was physically and mentally completely drained before the interrogation began. U.S. border authorities have broad powers over travelers entering the country. This includes the right to inspect electronic devices such as phones and laptops without suspicions or a warrant. I wasn't aware of this before reading this article, but that's quite severe, right?
The UK has a similar law, but it's under the Terrorism Act.
Sure.
So it happens to people fairly regularly, where often for reasons that to the layperson might seem a bit suspicious, they'll just get stopped at an airport and either arrested or detained under the Terrorism Act and have to hand over their devices. So Callum, who was the former Lotus Eaters guy, he's someone who this happened to.
He does travel
Basically,
logs nowadays, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
So this type of thing in the UK is quite common. And I imagine it's even worse in the US.
I've never had that
it's
happen to me
interesting-
anywhere in Europe. Yeah.
It's interesting they asked him about far-right extremism, though.
I
Especially
agree.
when he...
It's one of those things where, and we might get into this because, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, this is Trump's America. My take on this is that, you know, giving ICE powers gives, you know, ICE as a whole unit powers. And when you land in Newark, New Jersey, you know, it's not going to be, you know, some Texan, you know, white guy patting you down, right? It's probably going to be someone who's more left-leaning.
Shaniqua, 400 pounds, who's going to scam you.
I wasn't going to profile, but yeah, thank you, Lennox.
So you have to do cavity search after you've stripped down, and maybe some waterboarding. I mean, I remember when I was going to leave the US, they stopped me on the airport because I had a compass in my backpack, like just in my pencil case. Like you have a compass with a needle and like
Sure.
a piece of like, you know, graphite in it, and because of that I was detained and had to answer questions. So I am familiar with it. I can sort of see why that would be quite uncomfortable, but I was not aware of that, you know, electronic search stuff. And I'm like, what is the extent of that? Does anybody know? Did they demand that you open the phone for them with the password or like the thumbprint? And
Yes, they do that.
Yeah.
And he says here, they threatened me with a minimum of $5,000 fine or about 5 years in prisons if I refuse. And what they say is that you're obstructing, what is it? Obstructing justice or obstructing the investigation. And that's in America, that can be fined up to $5,000 if, you know, you find it, if it ends up being true, right? Of course, you know, before we go on, this is a massive sort of, I mean, at this point, this was sort of like a he said, she said kind of thing, you know, unless we have documents providing proof of what the US government thinks of this guy, which we'll get to in a moment. You know, this guy's just saying stuff. Let's be real, right? He might be embellishing. But I didn't get the vibe reading the Norwegian article that this guy was... I mean, you would be incredibly stupid to do this if they had... If you actually had done something wrong. And in a moment we'll get into... Because a lot of people... We'll get to that in a moment, because a lot of people said, well, they detained him because of possible drug use. But this is... But the only drugs this guy's been involved in has been... He's done drugs in countries where it's been legal previously, which, you know, if you did like weed in Holland like 4 years ago and now you travel to the US, that sounds like a weird suspicion to detain someone on in my head. But I'm not ICE, so okay. So here's the funny part. During the inspection of his phone, the officers found 2 images that didn't sit well with them. One was a caricature of US President J.D. Vance, and the other was a photo of a wooden pipe Mikkelsen had made himself a few years earlier. A tobacco pipe, to be clear. And this, of course, was the photo. Both images, this is Mikkelsen talking, both images had been automatically saved to my camera roll from a chat app, but I really didn't think these innocent pictures would stop me from entering the country. Mikkelsen says he found the lines of questioning very suspicious and confrontational. He tried to explain that the images had no political agenda and were meant to be humorous, but he felt like he was talking to a brick wall. After the officers found the images, the situation escalated. He was strip-searched, forced to give blood samples, undergo facial scanning, and fingerprinting. Quote, later I was taken back in the interrogation room, and the situation got even worse. I was pushed up against the wall and aggressively frisked. They were extremely rough and used physical force throughout, he says. I feel awful and broken, and I was close to tears several times. I was on the verge of panic. Well, this sounds a bit weak, but to be fair, he's been traveling for a long time. It's probably very stressful.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really know what's going to happen to you, right? It's a very precarious situation there, and he's probably heard some horror stories building up to it, and
Exactly.
everybody who's reading this is coming into it with sort of like they're thinking about these people who are being sent to El Salvador or something in like maximum security prison or something like that. So I assume that maybe he was thinking about that in the back of his head.
Yeah.
Also, I've been detained at an airport when I was coming back from a climbing trip and strip searched. It's very scary, especially if they're a bit rough with you. And I don't scare easily. And especially when they're quite aggressive, it can be very scary because when it happened to me, they were armed.
Right.
And it was going through my head that, right, if I give them an excuse, they might shoot me.
Yeah, it's not a very nice position to be in. And, adding on to this, you're pretty much sleep deprived and already kind of frayed at the edges, right?
Yeah.
In the end, I just wanted to go home, he says. Mikkelsen was kept locked in the cell for over 5 hours, and after a while, border authorities reached a conclusion. The 21-year-old was denied entry to the United States, and the dream vacation was over before he even had a chance to begin. And then, he just returns, and there's some interview with the foreign ministry, who obviously says that, the U.S. decides who the U.S. will let in, which, legally is the truth. And so we're going to dig deeper a bit into this because people are like, well, he's a drug user. That's why they stopped him. He has, he's a gun nut, whatever. As far as I figured out, this guy might have autism, by the way, because of like an interview with this guy from years ago. And he found his calling, as an autist. That was what the interview is about. He found his calling as a gunsmith. So he's worked as a gunsmith, which in Norway, more than in the US, actually does line up more with hiking. Being into rifles and stuff and hiking is, a logical overlap, without meaning that you're some sort of extremist or terrorist or anything. So this is from
it's pretty rich living in America and having somebody show up with us. He's interested in guns and does drugs and thinking that they're like an outsider or something. Like this is something out of the normal. It sounds like he would fit right in.
Yeah, one of the few reasons I would have for going to America would be either to go ice climbing in Michigan or Alaska or to go and shoot. Like, why else would you want to go to America? Because the food's terrible. It's full of fat people. I just don't understand why any American would think that's in any way unusual.
Well, I think there's potential for a lot of great people in America, but yes, the nature and the scenery is part of it. I would love to do the
lovely Americans, but
I would love to do if I had the time to set aside, weeks. I would love to do the old highway, like not the Route 66, but the old road network. I think it's called like the Lincoln Road or something like that, which takes you basically through like a bunch of towns in America, which would be interesting. But again, it would take weeks, so something for maybe later in life if America calms down a bit. Anyway, I'm going to try to speed through this a bit because it just adds a bit of embellishment, and then we have one final article which sort of ties this all together so we can get all the information out. This is from the paper that originally published the article, by the way. So, Mads from Tromsø, Norway, has made headlines around the world after being stopped by US immigration officers in Newark. He says after being warned he could face a fine or even prison, he gave the immigration officers the PIN code to his phone. He was then confronted with its contents, pictures the officers found questionable, in particular a meme of US President J.D. Vance portrayed as bald and a private photo of a pipe. Mikkelsen's story has caused a media frenzy with both national and international media covering and animal avatars on Twitter, I might add. Eventually, US Customs and Border Protection posted on X denying that the Norwegian was sent back for political reasons or because of the images on his phone. Quote, Mikkelsen was not denied for entry for any memes or political reasons. It was for his admitted drug use. When Mikkelsen woke up on Wednesday morning, he had 40 missed calls on his phone. Numerous media outlets were seeking his reaction to the statement. He told the Norwegian newspaper that he was questioned at the airport about illegal drug use. He admitted to having used cannabis on 2 occasions in Germany and New Mexico. Quote, "It's legal in both these places, so in my mind this is irrelevant," he said. Mikkelsen says he's unaware of the US statement on X and has no intention of joining this platform to read it. Based, by the way. Still, he finds it hard to believe that the US claims he was denied entry due to drug use. Quote, "It's a legal substance where it was taken, just like alcohol would be." Many US states have legalized cannabis for recreational use and even more for medical purposes. He says he never got the impression that the drug-related questions were a major issue at the time. The questioning continued, and Mikkelsen did his best to answer everything truthfully. After being denied entry, he received the decision in writing, one he only recently read. After reading the decision, there were claims that surprised him. According to Mikkelsen, the document states that he is an immigrant and holds a Spanish passport. And he says, "I'm Norwegian and I've never been to Spain." The decision also claims that he was carrying an actual pipe, which he denies. He assumes the officers were referring to the pipe pictures on his phone. "So it's not correct," the paper asks. "No, and I don't even have a Spanish passport." He also refused to claim that he intended to visit family in the US. According to Mikkelsen, that's not true. He has no family in the US. He had planned to visit friends, and his mother was supposed to join him later. It's easy to contradict what the US is saying. I don't have a Spanish family, and I have no connection to that country at all. He calls the US handling of the matter unprofessional. There really isn't much more to say about this. And something about he has his own theory that he's basically like a quota. Like they're quoting, they have a quota of denials. I don't know, that's speculation. And then for the last piece, this one's going to be through the Google translation, so it might be a bit rough. Let's see here. Yeah, this is something about the same stuff. Newark, questioned, ridiculed, threatened. Here's some more info. This is what I want to start with. June 11th, Mikkelsen woke up at 4 a.m. in Tromsø and then started his stuff. Yes, he's traveling. Something about the tourism to Germany has fallen off quite drastically since the Trump administration stepped into power. Here we go. After reading several horror stories from border control in the United States, Mikkelsen had taken several precautions to make sure the entry was painless. He had logged out of all social media on his phone, erased potentially problematic images from the camera roll, and generally failed to comment, and generally stayed away from commenting on the United States online, is what this says. I didn't post anything about the US authorities ever since Trump came into power, and I didn't comment much before that, just as a precaution. So this guy had specifically also tried to at least, appear clean. Now, you can have the whole, like, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, and say that, like, why was he deleting stuff? But obviously he was trying to make it so that if he did get detained, they wouldn't really have anything to hold him on, right? A long queue for the passport check, blah, blah, blah. He talks about how, they had like civilian officers who sort of like singled him out before he got to the immigration. He was taken to a back room, asked to wait with about 10 other travelers under the supervision of several armed guards. After about half-hour time, he was taken through an armored door. We had to go through an interrogation with 2 agents. They asked very weird questions. They wanted to know if I was involved in any right-wing extremist organizations, whether I had plans to smuggle drugs, or if I had any terrorist plans. Absolutely ridiculous questions, he says.
Isn't that the stuff when you go into the United States, to just give you a little form? That's at least what happens when I went there, like a little paper.
I remember that too. Like, are you going to do a terrorism? And then you check
so
no.
you're planning,
right.
you're like smuggling, bioterrorist material, or you're planning a government overthrow. It's like, oh damn, I should have checked those boxes, man. It's like, so they brought me.
So Despite Mikkelsen taking several precautions, the agents still found something they didn't like on his phone and edited the picture of Vice President J.D. Vance. It's a satirical picture where he's been edited to look a little extra stupid and ridiculous, Mikkelsen says, while holding up a clearly manipulated picture of the Republican Vice President. I don't know what he means by clearly edited. This just seems like a photo of J.D. Vance. I don't know about you guys. Mikkelsen explains that he had not saved the picture on the phone himself, but that he had been sent it by a friend through WhatsApp. A feature of the messaging app is that it automatically stores all the images received to the camera roll, which Mikkelsen thinks was the case of the image of Vance. I explained to them that this was something a buddy had sent to me, and that's how the app works. Then I was asked if I was associated with extremist organizations, and this picture was dangerous propaganda against the U.S. authorities. Which is kind of weird, because if you were on Twitter, you would think that, it's just the MAGA people who are sharing this, right? But this, like, again, he said, she said, this is what makes me think, like, they're profiling this guy as being some kind of, like, right-wing extremist. Why would they do that, right? You would think it would be the other way around.
Yeah, the ways of the security people are unknowable. I don't think anybody comes out of there happy, to be honest. There's always some weird logic that runs those people.
According to Mikkelsen, the agents also asked a lot about a 4-year-old picture of a tobacco pipe. Mikkelsen says this was a pipe that he had made as a gift for a friend when he was in high school, but the agent refused to agree with him. He told me that this was a pipe that was used to smoke cannabis. He knew a lot about this, so there was no point in arguing with him. The story of Mikkelsen now is running around the world with several major international blah, blah, blah. Yes, CBP says this is false. Let's see here. Here we go. After Mikkelsen's history became known through the Daily Mail, the Deputy Minister of Homeland Security also explained, claiming that the drug use is the reason why the 21-year-old was denied entry into the United States. Quote, bullshit claims that Mikkelsen was, it's bullshit claim that Mads Mikkelsen was denied entry because of a J.D. Vance meme. Mikkelsen was denied entry to the United States for his confessed drug use, writes Tricia McLaughlin, United States Deputy Minister of National Security on X. However, in the documents Mikkelsen received, as TV2 has seen, the paper, it says nothing about drug use. The documents the U.S. border authorities have issued says that Mikkelsen is denied access to the United States because, quote, he's trying to obtain unauthorized work without approval and satisfactory documentation. It says here, it appears you are attempting to engage in unauthorized employment without authorization and proper documentation. So he's been labeled as like an illegal immigrant, basically. The Norwegian was thus denied entry because the authorities suspected that he would try to get a job in the United States without a valid work permit. The drug use is never mentioned in the rationale Mikkelsen has received, but he also states that he did not receive a complete document at the airport and that he might have lost the document page as well. TV2 has submitted this information to Homeland Security, which is responsible for CBP. They have not responded to our inquiries. Before the Norwegian was sent back on the first flight back to Oslo, he claimed that he had to take a blood test, a DNA sample, and a face scan. He also had to sign on a number of documents confirming that that everything that the guards had said and done was correct. Something like a waiver, I guess. If not, I would be given a $5,000 fine and 5 years in prison. In the documents Mikkelsen signed, it said, among other things, that he had a Spanish passport and that he had plans to settle in the United States. The paper has seen and confirmed that these documents say that. Obviously, I'm apparently a Spaniard in the agent's eyes, he says, who's half Danish, half Norwegian, and not at all Spanish. Yeah, and something more about him not wanting to return. So, going back to, my tweet, yes, I accidentally did a bit of a fake news because I'm not allowed to edit this. I said that he got detained because of the meme. That's technically not true, and it wasn't really intended to be as well. But by the time I wanted to change it, obviously I couldn't edit it to say that he was more or less, part of the reason he got sent home was because of the meme. But interesting times. Don't come to the US, I guess, if you're white.
they don't want white immigrants who like guns and smoke weed, apparently. So yeah, stay out. I mean, I wonder if like this is something that was already in place and would have happened anyway, or if this has gotten worse after Trump came in. That's kind of the only question I have right now.
It possibly is, because what you said about a quota does make sense, because I don't know about in other countries, but in the UK, whenever immigration controls are stricter, what they end up doing is they end up being more strict than they otherwise would be on the people who would come into the country and work. And I think that's because those type of people are easier to deal with, because when you try and enact strong immigration controls on people who would not really contribute to your society, they're generally harder to do that with, because they basically have the immigration tribunal equivalent of a tantrum. So it might be that lazy ICE agents are essentially going, right, let's bar this random Norwegian or Danish person from coming into the countries, because then we meet our quota. I don't think that's a ridiculous hypothesis as to what happened.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And considering, he has signed all the documents, allegedly under some form of pressure. I mean, they got their asses covered, right? Because the document says that this guy is a Spaniard trying to illegally enter the country to work. So whatever he has to say, he's going to have to lawyer up and try to take on the U.S. government, and who's got the time for that, right? Nobody
with a life.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the incentive here and like kind of the red meat is like, okay, how many people can you deport? You try to just optimize for that. Then, yeah, it is easier to deport people like him than and the actual people you don't want in your country. So,
yeah, I don't know if there's anything more to say about this, but I don't know. It's just incredibly bizarre, and it was incredibly funny that again, the straw that broke the camel's back would be the JT Vance meme. I had a good laugh about it when I read the article. Let's get into the reason we have you on here, Reactionary. Do you want me to show the photo of your new book?
Yeah, please do.
So you have written a book that is being published by Imperium Press that is called Lawfare, A Practical Guide. Why don't you tell the listeners first a little bit about yourself, and maybe then a little bit about sort of what spurred you to write this, and a little bit about the book, of course.
Yeah, you're being doxed, by the way, but I assume that's intentional.
That's intentional, yeah. Right, so for those of you who don't know me and haven't seen any of my stuff, I'm a UK-based law student. I'm a law student for the next couple of months, and then I'll graduate and finish with my master's and my bar practice course. For some years now, I've been writing a blog, which is Reaction Reading Law at Substack, on the topic mostly of practical approaches to using the law and how to use the law to get what we want and get justice for ourselves as right-thinking, sensible centrists. And I met the lovely gentleman that I'm on at a conference called the WITAN, which is going on this year. And if you want to go, you can have a look at shieldings.com. I definitely recommend going because it's good fun.
I'm just showing your Substack here.
My Substack, yes. Yeah. So I don't just write about law and practical approaches. More recently, I have written about other topics.
Cuckoldry, apparently.
Yes. Well, do you want to know the backstory behind that?
Sure. Give me a rundown of the cuckoldry article.
Right. So, I'll start at the very beginning. I didn't have a very good time at university. Basically, because I was the only sensible centrist on campus, and within a week of being at university, I was getting harassed by Antifa. which was great. So I ended up having like some Antifa chicks like barge into my house and like be annoying. I managed to get them to leave.
Sure.
Which, to be honest, because they were sort of like you're annoying young women, that was fine. But essentially, the rumors going around campus was that I was a fascist, which I'm not. And this Antifa woman, who I was sharing an environmental law class with, who I tried not to talk to because she was very vocal in terms of being an Antifa member. So she was the type of person who would like protest outside our Catholic church whenever we were doing like pro-life events. So generally, the
Sure,
sort of
yeah.
unpleasant leftist who you don't want to talk to. But essentially, what happened and what inspired me to write that article was she asked me for coffee after one seminar, and I was like, okay, why do you want me to go to coffee with you? And she was like, oh, I just want to get to know you better. And then while we were having coffee, she started questioning me about my sexuality. And then it
Okay.
moved on to her asking me if I wanted to shag her and let her boyfriend watch. So after that experience, I obviously said no and went to mass because this was on Ash Wednesday, which is rather dodgy timing, to say the least. And then about a month or two ago, I was reading in the pub, which for those of you who aren't British, a pub is like a bar, but a bit more homely. I was reading The Metaphysics of Sex by Julius Evola, and this couple came over and started talking to me, and they were relatively good company until they started talking to me about their sexual experimentation with cuckoldry. And after this happened, I completely lost the plot because I was thinking in my head, how common is this type of hedonistic behavior? So to help me cope with it, I began looking it up and researching it for an article.
One moment. Javier Olivia says, what moment would be the appropriate timing to ask to be asked to participate in sexual degeneracy? How did she drop that stuff? Is it just out of nowhere?
What, the Antifa chick? Well, she started by asking me questions about my sexuality and saying that I come across as quite asexual.
Ah.
And I got to explain what she meant by that, and she was like, I've just never seen you like really horny.
Interesting.
So
was her idea that like, you know, she perceives you as like this weird asexual guy, so if she can like basically turn you on in front of her boyfriend, that's like the ultimate fantasy or something.
That's the impression I got. And also because she thought I was a fascist, like that was another element to it.
Right. Jesus Christ, dude.
Yes.
I'm going to choose to believe this stuff because I like you. If someone else had come up and said this, I would have think like they would have made it up or asked like ChatGPT to generate a story.
No, honestly, it's not. Apparently, this is more common than you think. So when I published this, I got messages from a couple of friends of mine saying that they've gone through a similar thing.
Yeah, so in the article you post some data on this stuff as well. So yeah, check out
this article.
Reactionary Reading Law on Substack. I know I will check this out. If nothing else, it'll be a little bit fun.
Yes.
But let's get back to the book you wrote. I mean, what was the sort of impetus here for why you wanted to write this, and you know, in a short way, what is it about?
Well, the term lawfare gets thrown around a lot, and no one who is right of centre really has any idea what the term means, certainly not a practical understanding. So what I did was I read a bunch of articles on lawfare as a topic and thought, okay, what can I add to this? And what I could add to it was applying lawfare to a political dimension, because ordinarily lawfare as a term refers to using the law as a weapon of war. And what that means in practice is using specialist lawyers to try and cause logistical problems for hostile states. So an example of this would be you've got a team of American military lawyers who try and use the law of a particular country to make it harder for a rival country to move goods. So that could be anything from some countries allow third parties to
Yeah.
appeal licenses.
This happens. This happens a lot in business, especially in like China and stuff. Like
Yeah.
rival companies will like get goods detained in like shipping ports and stuff of
Yeah.
their rivals. Yeah.
It happens all over the world. And I was quite fascinated to find that out. And I thought, right, what can I do in applying the topic of lawfare to a political context? So that's where I came up with the book. And what I do in each chapter of the book is I outline particular lawfare tactics, such as strategic lawsuits and legal misinformation, controlling of language, and I do a deep dive as to how they're used and how they work as a particular concept and a practical tool for political actors.
Sorry, I think I lost connection for a moment. What were you saying?
What I was saying, going back about a minute or so, I was saying that what I try to do in the book is be specific as to what is meant by the term lawfare and
Right.
discuss and explain particular lawfare tactics.
Mm-hmm.
So an example was legal misinformation, which is my favorite. Everyone who's proofread the book has said that's their favorite chapter. Strategic lawsuits, criminalization, and legislating from the bench are some of the topics that I discuss. Please continue, Walrus.
No, I was going to say what that entailed, but I mean, without giving it away, do you have any examples of sort of what this, or how that, but you call this a practical guide, like how would this sort of benefit the layperson in that sense?
Right, so I've done a US and UK comparison, and my reason for doing that is the UK's constitution and the power and the way the judiciary works is one extreme, whereas the US's is another extreme. And what I mean by that is the power of judges in the UK is considerably less than in the US. And in the UK, judges are appointed somewhat randomly outside of qualified persons. So there's a committee that will select for qualified candidates, and what will happen is those candidates will get passed on to the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister will take them to the monarch, and the monarch will approve the candidates for judges. So for the most part, judges aren't necessarily picked for political grounds, whereas in the US they are.
Right.
And judges in the US have considerably more power than British judges do. For example, American judges can, certainly the constitutional judges and the federal judges. I mean, to be fair, you also have this in state judges as well for state courts. What can happen is your American judges can strike out legislation or create rights that they read into the Constitution. And basically, that's how all the liberal legislation that a lot of European countries have is created in America. For example, gay marriage essentially was a Supreme Court decision where the Supreme Court decided that it's implied within the Constitution that gay people are allowed to get married, the Obergefell v. Hodges decision. And basically, that wasn't written in a clear way in the American Constitution, but the Supreme Court, staffed by liberal justices, liberal progressives, was able to decide that and make that law. Whereas in the UK, for example, that was passed by Act of Parliament when David Cameron was Prime Minister. And as far as I understand it, it's the same for most other countries. Why I chose to do a US and UK comparison as well was most European countries and most other countries that are in the Western European or Anglosphere have somewhat of a similar system to the US and similar to the UK. So one of my favorite examples is the Netherlands, for example. The Netherlands has a very powerful judiciary, and a judiciary that can strike out legislation, which is a problem for the populists in Netherlands who are more towards our side, because what's happening, and you also see this in the US with the executive orders, the judiciary is halting right-wing progress, and that's basically because we don't control the judiciary. And the reason for that, and this is discussed in the conclusion to the book, that the reason for that is basically right of centre justices or lawyers are normally conservatives, who the idea of using their political and philosophical views in the creation of case law and the administration of justice is horrific to them. So what ends up happening is liberal progressives have got 100 years of theory, legal theory, that means that they're willing to use the law
justification for doing whatever they want, essentially. Right.
Yes.
Once they're into power.
Yeah. Right-wing or conservative judges, wherever you go in the world, as far as I'm aware, don't have that, and I think that is a problem. Sorry, I've just talked for the best part of 10 minutes.
No, it's great. Well, Luddy, do you have any questions? I was just thinking about the. Is it a Stone Toss comic about libertarians? About we can't use the state power, that would be evil, and then like they find themselves in like about facing the wall, right? and some soldiers are.
It's a typical thing, and yeah, there are probably many reasons for this, but there generally seems to be a sort of deficit when you reach the professional class and you come to people who have a conservative disposition or some type of conservative ideology, either a reluctance of using their power or a reluctance to use their position to even produce resources that can be used by other people. Even in academic circles, there's just not a lot of interest there, and of course some of it you can chalk down to gatekeeping, but some of it is just a dispositional thing, which is it's very unfortunate, but it is right, as you say. I think especially in the United States with their kind of strong judicial system and litigious culture, that it's just such a disproportionate amount of power that you get as a judge, and the sort of political nature of it as well, where they just like you said, they just kind of spin these rights out of nothing from just these interpretations of the Constitution. I guess the Roe versus Wade would be another example of that, where the right to abortion is just sort of spun out of the right to privacy. So it is very activistic.
Yeah, especially when applying every type of evidence and reasoning to that topic. Every bit of evidence that I've ever seen about the American founding fathers, the people who wrote the Constitution, would suggest that they were not pro-abortion.
Yeah, makes sense.
So,
right.
Yeah, that type of argument I just find completely enraging, because a lot of the arguments are written so badly from progressive and liberal justices that it makes your head hurt. The only exception to this that I've got is a lot of the judgments on prayer in schools, for example, is actually quite well argued, and I find that quite interesting. And I think I addressed that a bit in the book, but it's not that relevant to the topic of lawfare. Just a bit of a tangent there.
Sure. So you mentioned, Netherlands as something, but is a judge in Netherlands sort of politically chosen in the way they are in America?
I don't think so. I think they're government appointees and not elected. However, it's a long time since I studied the politics of the Netherlands.
So I'm just thinking,
system in the Netherlands.
Because if they're not sort of, you don't have at least the veneer of democracy or elections to appoint these judges, you essentially have the opportunity to ask someone who might, let's say you're like a lefty, guy who basically go through law school and get into the judge position only to start legislating your ideology, essentially, without anyone ever having a say. That sounds kind of scary, right?
Yeah, it is terrifying. So I'm generally against elected judges because, as far as I'm aware, it makes them more political. But
Sure, but what's
even
stopping non-elected judges from being political if their powers are political, right?
Well, yes, that's a fair point, but I think it would make you more political if you've got to go out and campaign for your
Sure.
judicial. Because whenever I've watched electoral campaigns for judges in the US, a lot of the really local ones talk a lot about parking fines and that type of thing, and dismissing certain amount of speeding tickets and parking fines.
Sure,
And
sure.
it's quite funny to me because what they're basically doing is they're basically just offering the not to enforce the law for most people. And I'm obviously quite critical towards the way that parking fines and speeding tickets are used. If I had my way, there'd be no speeding or no speed limits. But I grew up in a part of the world where they don't actually have speed limits.
Right.
So my general point is, yes, they'll be political if they're political appointees, but I would suggest they're going to be more political if they're elected.
Yeah, that makes sense. As enlightened despot said, elected judges are prisoners of the particular political crisis of the time. I understand that. I'm just thinking if the problem is that, slowly but surely, any system, it's the old adage of any system that isn't explicitly right wing becomes left wing and will, eventually outlaw being right wing in a sense.
I think
how do you turn that around or fight it?
By not being conservative. So
sure,
I finished my book basically the same time that not the populist delusion. What was AA's book on
Prophets of Doom?
Called Prophets of Doom? Yes. So I just finished writing the conclusion the day before the Witan, and he gave his talk on how cyclical theory works and how conservatism is a civilization killer.
Yep.
And essentially, the Cthulhu argument, Cthulhu always swings left, and anything that isn't explicitly right wing becomes left wing. Yep. The reason you do that is the reason that's an issue is because for the past century or so, most of the right has been conservative. You're trying to conserve something. But the problem with that is conservatism isn't an ideology, and also what people are conserving is somewhat different. A lot of people would disagree with me that someone like Thomas Carlyle is a conservative, but in some ways he is, because what he's trying to conserve is the last vestiges of a feudal hierarchical order. And to a lesser extent, someone like Edmund Burke is also the same. He's more progressive than Carlyle, certainly. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to preserve the hierarchical social order that enables people to take personal responsibility and limit state power because it's not needed. Whereas if you look at a modern conservative, I'll use some politicians, like someone like Boris Johnson or even David Cameron, what they're trying to conserve is very different. They're trying to conserve
because
neoliberalism.
What society has been, molded differently. So conserving, you're conserving something else.
Yeah. So I'm not necessarily an anti-progressive. I think progress is fine, depending on what you're wanting to progress to. And I think the right or sensible centre within our respective countries has some things that are basically universally agreed upon as to what we want to move towards. And what I would say those things is less immigration and remigration, but also sovereignty within our own countries, not necessarily in a political sense, but in terms of access to natural resources and using our own natural resources so that we can have a certain independence from whether it's the US or one another.
Right.
So those are two goals that, as far as I'm aware, are non-controversial within our circles. And
well, you might get some pushback from Ludwig Path. He tends to enjoy, mutual cooperation, but only for, 130 IQ Europeans.
Oh yeah, that's fine. The point I'm trying to make is that somewhere like the UK should probably be energy independent and an energy exporter because we've got ridiculous amounts of energy.
There's no reason you shouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm fine for cooperation, but I also think there's a...
You have a tendency to be very draconian in the stuff you do as well. Like, you're, still debating digital ID, and the proposed digital ID you guys are talking about is so much more draconian than anything resembling digital ID that you find in Norway.
Yeah.
So,
unfortunately, that's Tony Blair's fault, not mine.
Yeah, of course. It's really going in the, like, I'm sorry, we can't sell you this carrot because computer says you're a racist, right?
Yes.
So, Ludwig Path, do you have any comments here?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. But I got nothing else. I think you're doing a good job so far. So, anything from the audience?
Well, we have this from Glassman Gorm, which might be, self-evident. He says law is their weapon. I assume that he means liberals or left-leaning. As per the Scrump video, if it takes money to defend yourself from defamation, then you don't have that right or power. They can do it to you and you pay for it.
Yeah, basically that's correct. And certainly in the UK, there are things going on behind the scenes to create organisations that can help support our own people, not just on the free speech front, but also when people in our circles are getting harassed. Because in a lot of cases, lots of people who are sensible centrists have to put up with quite a lot of harassment. And that's the only word for it, whether that's constantly getting death threats on social media or literally having people turn up at your house.
Yeah, I mean, Morgoth recently was exposed by Hope Not Hate, and they, creeped around his old apartment building and stuff, like really weird stuff.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, I wasn't sure whether that was in the public domain because I heard about that in private, so I wasn't going to mention any examples.
No, it's been publicized, so yeah.
Okay, fair enough. But
I mean, I'm not going to pull it up, but yeah, Hope Not Hate has published this, and it's I think it's interesting to put it in the way you did about sort of like you do it by not being right wing. I think that's coming from the Karlstage. I think a lot of the Anglos that were there is sort of like waking up to this, that we're not going to get out of this by framing things as left or right. We're going to have to figure out, what parts of progress do we like, what parts of progress do we not like, and delineate by that instead.
Yeah. Despite what Ed Dutton might think, I quite like that the child mortality rate's quite low.
Right, exactly.
So
I mean, there's some things that are good. Dentistry is quite nice, right?
Yeah.
So Javier, he says you can't move society rightward without at least pushing up against what's considered legal. Well, the thing is, I think I'm getting from you is what you're saying is that while trying to move society rightward, sort of as the means, is not necessarily the way to go.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to do, because in the UK, at least, in terms of public opinion, basically everyone I know who lives around where I do is somewhat of an ethnic realist to varying degrees. Sure. They just don't really know how to articulate it, express it, or understand it. A lot of the time, you just need to ask them some questions and they'll soon get it. Because where I live, there is a small upper middle class British population, and they only hang out with one another and they're very aware of who the people committing crime are.
Right.
So they're quite ethnically conscious in that way. They just don't really have a means of expressing it.
Mhm.
So moving rightwards in terms of things like anti-immigration stuff and that type of thing, there are some serious legal barriers to that, depending on what you want to do. But it's case by case, and there are things that are going on in private that, sorry, pardon me, that people are trying to do. But we're not going to be able to just start remigration like that going
No.
into the future. I think it's going to take centuries, maybe one or two, to get our home back.
Well, sure.
Sorry,
I
that's
mean,
really...
we're in it for the long haul in a sense.
Yes.
But I think a lot can be done in a lifetime, right? At
Yeah,
least
a
in
lot
terms
can be done.
of changing the sort of general mood and abilities, or just the flexibility of thinking, right? I
Yeah,
think for a lot of people.
what I think needs to happen going forward, at least in the UK, is we need to build long-standing networks that work, because the problem that the sensible centre or right wing has had in the UK, that is the right that isn't conservative, is constant infighting and the state coming down on it unfairly. So I think going forward, people need to have a serious think as to how we're going to achieve reasonable goals going forward.
Yeah, yeah.
And if my
Javier
book can
Olivia,
help with that, that would be great. Have
I
we
hope
got
so
super
too.
chats?
No, we don't have any super chats, but I have a comment here from Javier Olivia who says, I always thought Morgoth was that old guy who mumbled a lot and appeared on Clarkson's farm. He's not, but I would say that,
No.
when I met Morgoth at the Witten a couple of years ago, he looked exactly how I imagined he would. And I have been watching Clarkson's farm, and I would think that, on the maybe like unintentionally, Clarkson is sort of radicalizing people a bit in the UK. Towards more of that like self-sufficiency stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, Clarkson's farm, what he's done a really good job of is convincing people that the administrative state needs an axe taking to it and streamlining to quite a significant degree.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit of both, right? I mean, there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of weird government schemes, but then at the same time, it's an industry that seems to be so down to the wire that one or two bad years in a row and it wipes out half the farmers, right?
Yeah.
So sort of building it back up to something is gonna require a lot of like concerted effort, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Sorry, I think I lost you there.
Oh, I was just going to say that if I became Lord Protector of the Realm in England and Britain more broadly, one of the first things I'd do is sort out the tax structure for oil and natural gas and start taking quite a lot of the weight that farmers have off their shoulders, because then Britain would have decent food security and energy security, and then I'd start remigrating people.
Sure. Yeah. We have a comment here from Douge who says, legislative obstacles to remigration in the UK are daunting, as is the case in most other jurisdictions in Europe. I'm not sure what the details are on that for the UK.
Right.
But just from reading the news, a lot of the European countries seem to be flirting with this. Denmark, I think Sweden has mentioned it. I mean, when they talk about it in the news, it seems perfectly possible, if the will is there, right?
Yeah. From a UK context, because we have parliamentary sovereignty, I would literally just pass it into law, setting up a ministry of remigration, and I would also make it very clear in the legislation that any legislation, because in Britain the way legislation works is the most recent legislation has dominance. So I would make it very clear, and the legislation would be very well drafted, that would give the state powers to remigrate people. And part of that would be changing the structure around so that people who were essentially foreigners couldn't access social welfare of any kind. So, and also paying them to leave, because quite a lot of people are in the UK because essentially the British state is very good at giving out welfare. And once you turn that tap off, I'm sure it's the same for Norway and Denmark. Once that tap is turned off, people will just leave with their own card, especially if you pay them to.
Right. There's also was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago, like Path, this is a small percentage of the population, but we covered, we covered the idea of like second and third generation immigrants in Norway basically looking to remigrate themselves to other nations, or to, like, let's say you're like, child of Iranian immigrants or something from the 70s. You want to like go to like the UAE or something, or Dubai, to work as a lawyer or something. You got your education here in Norway, and you're like, there's, without saying it, they're saying there's a bunch of white people that I don't relate to around here, so I want to leave, right?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah, but I think that's a different issue than the let's just say like the welfare class.
Of course, yeah. I'm just saying there's multiple prongs you can use to attack this problem, right? And I proposed, for this group, just doing like a thanks for staying, hope you have a good life kind of scheme, where you just lose your citizenship, and we get you a plane ticket to wherever you want to go or something, and that would probably be less. That would probably be cheaper than investing in this person over the course of their life, right?
Yeah.
Or at least, or even their children, again, in the next generation. All right. Anything else we want to cover here with this book? Bloody Path, anything else you want to talk about? Anything we haven't covered, Henry?
Not really. Nothing that I can really think of.
So, if you were gonna be American for a moment, why should people read this book?
Because I like to think that I made some good suggestions, and as an outsider, I've got a perspective on the way the American judicial system works that a lot of Americans won't have. So I've also researched it quite a lot, especially some of the stuff in there about legislating from the bench you might find interesting.
Sure.
And that's basically it.
Yeah, so this would be especially interesting to any Americans listening to this, because you have this outside perspective. But of course, people in the UK should probably be interested in this as well.
Oh yeah, certainly.
So where can we get this? It's on Imperium Press.
For now it's only on Imperium Press.
I'm sure if you're heading to the Witten, there might be some copies floating around this year.
Yeah, Maven hasn't confirmed it yet, but there should be copies floating around at the Witten.
Great. So here at the Imperium Press, you can get it for $22, which isn't too bad in paperback form, I believe. That's not too bad.
Paperback.
That's pretty good.
My grandma wants a hardback copy.
Right.
But she's ordered the paperback, so.
Oh, you're gonna get one custom made for her then.
Possibly.
We have $10 Canadian from Enlightened Despot, who says, "Great pod, cheers." Thank you, Enlightened Despot.
Thank you very much.
That means so much, I guess, is the line. As with the tweet thing, we appreciate any donations you guys provide. We're not necessarily doing this for profit. We're doing it for the love of it, and all of this helps keep the lights on, as it were, in terms of buying some equipment and paying for the StreamYard subscription. Do we have time, Ludicpath, for like a quick article on how Ukrainian refugees in Norway are doing?
Well, how much do you think it's going to be? Yeah, we usually have like a 90-minute time schedule. Maybe we could take a look at it since we missed it last time.
Yeah, we can do 15 minutes on this. Are you okay to stay for a little longer, Henry?
Ideally not, no, because I've got to be at a party in 50 minutes.
Right.
All right. Well, why don't we just sort of say goodbye to you now then? And thank you for coming on. Thank you for talking to us about your book. And again, please check it out on imperiumpress.org. Or if you're, at the Witten or something similar, you'll probably see some of these books floating around. So check them out.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Goodbye.
All right. Goodbye.
All right. So, final couple of minutes here. We will. So when we were talking about, I forget what we were talking about last week. Was it the women voting thing? And
we did like people going nuts over AI stuff, which is
right.
I mean, it's still a pretty hot topic.
But I do remember us talking about. I saw some
video today about some. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
There's people who are like screwing up their relationships because of AI. Some guys trying to marry ChatGPT or. I mean, it's an endless wellspring of kooky entertainment here, but we did touch on. No. Yeah, we were supposed to talk about this, but I think with the AI stuff went on.
My point was that we were talking about. I think we discussed women voting preferences. They had interviewed a bunch of women, and one of them were talking about how well Ukrainian refugees were doing. And I mentioned that I actually had an article that sort of questions this, and this is that article. We just didn't have time to cover it.
Oh, so, yeah, now I remember. I didn't. There's what do you call it? Recall and recognition or something. Different types of memory. Now that you mention it, it's looked up in the back of my head. And the context was the slightly browner woman who felt like refugees are great, but we're giving a disproportionate amount of attention to the Yukis. So we the browner variant of refugee should get a little bit more of the program though.
Exactly. So Norway has welcomed 50,000 adults from Ukraine, and this is a report on how they're doing, like in the labor force. So they're talking about like a woman named Valentina Nichiporenko, who's 43 years old. She's just got her first permanent job in Norway. She fled Ukraine in 2023. And is ready to start her full-time job in August. In her home country, she's a trained midwife, and here she learned that she had to do more education if she wanted to work in the same profession. She didn't want to do that, so she started working in a kindergarten. It really was a dream job from when I was young, but it just happened on a little down the road, says Nichiporenko, laughing. So she's happy with where she's ended up, apparently. Almost 50,000 are working age. Since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, almost 92,000 of Ukrainian refugees have come to Norway, and about 50,000 of these are of working age, which is between 22 and 66. 1 in 3 had been given a job in Norway at the end of March 2025. So we have about a 33% employment rate from 2023, which, to be honest, given the volume of Ukrainian refugees over such a short period of time, that's a decent that is a decent employment rate, I think. But we also have an employment rate based on a country of origin here for Norway. So we have Syria, which is 23%, which is doing the worst. Sweden, which is 78%, doing the best. Britain is at 60%. The US is at 50%, Russia 43%, Ukraine 31%. And then you have Poland is doing well as well, but Poland has been immigrating to Norway for such a long time. Lithuania as well.
You have to account
That,
for why they're coming, right? Some of them, if they're refugees, and that's not the same as them they're coming from work.
Exactly.
If they're like Polish, it's like almost 100% that they're coming to do some type of job, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're from Syria, you're most likely a refugee. Of course, there's only like 1,000 of them, so it's not that big of a, impact. So Ukrainian refugees apparently are largely well educated, according to this. 59% have completed higher education, while a further 16% have begun higher education, ostensibly in Norway then, I guess, or maybe they started it before the war broke out. This sets them apart from most other refugee groups. Wait, I thought, in 2015, I thought we were getting doctors and engineers. What happened?
Yeah, it's disappointing, I guess. Reality is disappointing. Yeah.
Still, many of the Ukrainians are struggling to get work. The Norwegian authorities have had expectations that Ukrainians will come out quickly to move quickly into working life. The reason why it has not gone this way is, among other things, that it takes time to learn Norwegian. Yes, Norwegian is a hard language to learn. Nor has it been very easy to get approved education from Ukraine. Several refugees lack papers on education from Ukraine, and of course, being wartime, it's hard to maybe get the paperwork. For natural reasons, it's hard to get the papers. Let's see here. Their share of the work has increased steadily until August 2024 and has since been stable. So, for a while now, it has stayed at 31%. The proportion of work increases with residence time, which makes sense. The longer you stay, the more Norwegian, to a certain extent you become. At least you learn the language, which makes it easier to work. What I noticed though, Bloody Path, actually, I forgot to tell you about this. I'm doing paternity leave a couple of days a week now with baby Walrus, and the other day we went into town, and it's 11 o'clock or something. It's the middle of the day, right? And I'm walking down the road and or just walking around town. I hear a lot of Ukrainian. There's a lot of like older Ukrainian women all around me, which I've never seen before. So
yeah, it shouldn't be surprising. Usually, if you are not at work at those hours, you get to see weird stuff moving around.
Yeah. It was just an interesting experience, because I've thought like, where are all the Ukrainians? I'm like, oh, okay, well, they're not at work, unfortunately, right?
No. Yeah, you can go to shopping malls during like work hours or something and see like Syrians or people from Egypt sitting in coffee shops. Something that seems to be a standard thing.
I mean, I wouldn't expect it really of like some 50-year-old woman from Ukraine who got here like 1 year ago to necessarily, be an engineer or something. It's just interesting that I've wondered, sort of like in my experience, where are all the Ukrainians? And now I know, right? They're just not out at the same time as me.
I do get some exposure through my daycare as well. There seems to be a lot of the women who are employed at that daycare who are some brand of Eastern European, at least, without me being able to identify it. So they're also like, Ukrainian refugee kids at my daycare. But there's just a lot of names when I'm looking at the staff that are Eastern Europeans, and it seems to check out with like that, the woman in the article. My daughter is even picking up some pronunciation of words that I thought were sort of odd. So I thought, okay, where's this coming from? Yeah.
So among the refugees who came here in 2022, 41% are currently part of the labor force, meaning that they're doing about 10% better. As newly arrived refugees, they have a right to follow the introduction program, which is like a general, individually adapted thing that helps you get into work and learn Norwegian, etc. Those who have higher education from their home country are entitled to Norwegian education for up to 12 months. So here we have the dark blue line here is people who are currently employed. The red line is people who are registered with the what's the word I'm looking for? Registered with the
unemployment office.
Welfare. The unemployment office, the welfare office, and the light blue line here is the amount of people receiving this like initial, because when you come here as a refugee, you get this like initial program that gives you some money, so you won't starve essentially. A supervisor for the welfare office, Olena Shuminova, has worked closely with Nichiparenko and many other Ukrainian refugees. She says many work on something other than what they're educated for. Some have, for example, financial education, but they end up working in a kindergarten. For Nichiparenko, the woman at the beginning, kindergarten turned out to be more than just a job. This is the first place I arrived at, and it's very well suited to me. That's important, she says. And so there's some talk with the unemployment authorities, and they say that we need employers who are willing to take a chance and hire their Ukrainian refugees, he says. And which is sort of like when I shared this article with you, I remember thinking that, yes, it's easy to say that, but in my experience, no one really wants to hire anyone who doesn't speak Norwegian at a certain competency level, because it's really hard, right? It's really hard to deal with them. Even though, a business will be like, well, our business language is English and all our emails are in English. Just having someone around the lunch table that forces you to talk English is going to, be a productivity hit. It seems like it's not a problem for me. Personally, because I have a good English education, but for the sort of like average Norwegian, even though we are good, we speak English well, we don't like to do it, right? Because we're not necessarily practiced.
If you're a high income country as well, this is a problem, right? Because a lot of the economy is then selling services to each other, and there's less of a benefit to try to sell it to other countries again. So that is going to be a bit of a productivity drain, as you said. And if the margins aren't super good, or if you think it's going to be a hit to the workplace culture, then, well, yeah, you just don't do that. And I think it's similar.
I've just spotted and this isn't just Ukrainians. It's across the board. It's just like a stated versus revealed preference thing, right?
Yeah, I think so too, and they might be unsure about the quality of their education as well. So, yeah. But again, if they're happy at daycare, so that's a good thing. I think we need more hands, right? You have enough consultants already, and of course, this is a trade-off that you're getting, right? If you're going to take less immigrants, you're going to have to be able to deal with more expensive human capital. It just is a realistic trade-off. You have to dig your own ditches at some point, and have just less hands to go around, which of course means more automation and that kind of stuff. But you're not going to have like personal drivers or
there is a ceiling to
or anything like this, or people like mowing your lawn for cheap or something. So
I remember that years ago going to like a developer conference, and there was this like American woman doing I might have told the story before, doing like a presentation. I think it was called like something like hacking your work-life balance. And she was talking to literally a room full of Norwegian men, telling them that, you have to be able to like define what you're willing to sort of like pay to not worry about. So one of those were like, well, if you spend so much time in your garden all week, you just buy a gardener, like just get a gardener to take care of your lawn so you don't have to worry about it, right? So you can be more efficient at work. And it's like, I'm going to have to pay this guy like a full year's salary to take care of my lawn. I can't do that. It's going to be so expensive. It just doesn't work like that in Norway.
That's why everybody has this
purely American perspective, right?
Yeah, that's why you have these robo-cutters that everybody's using, or maybe you just shouldn't live in a house with a garden in the first place.
Oh yeah, I got a robo cutter not too long ago. They're pretty good. It's nice. What I don't
it's-
like is
yeah.
mowing the lawn. I see mowing the lawn as very much sort of like a time waster. Like, I don't mind trimming hedges and doing that stuff, but mowing the lawn specifically annoys me, and I'm happy to let the robot do that.
Yeah, and there is like a lot of demand for people who could mow lawns. I mean, if people say like the country was geared up in a way where you could pay people like a low hourly rate to mow lawns, I think you could just mow lawns all day. But it just
yeah.
isn't, right, because of regulation, a highly educated population, and so
Regulation
on.
and,
So
employment tax and all that bullshit, right? You'd have to like classify menial labor basically as like its own type of thing. You could do that maybe.
so yeah, you just get less of those services, and for good or for worse, that is sort of the cost of if you want. We don't have zero immigration by any means, but at least if you want less immigration,
yes,
then this is the type of model you have to have.
There are some workarounds with like seasonal workers, like berry pickers, essentially. But again, they're seasonal workers, so. Let's see here. It says that very often the Ukrainians are overqualified to whatever they end up working in, which is, in a sense, I guess, a good thing. It's bad because we're not matching, but at least we're, you can say that you're getting people who are at least, higher educated. They're smart, right?
Yeah,
They're quote unquote good or high quality refugees in a sense.
And like the salary and the lifestyle that they're going to get for their underqualified work in Norway would likely be a lot higher than what they would get for doing a job that they're qualified for in Ukraine. And that's not just guessing. That's I mean, that's pretty certain. Yeah, working as a kindergarten assistant or something, you could probably get you the same salary as like a senior dev or something in Ukraine.
So they're talking about, the barrier of entry in the language, and the paper asks, why can't we give them more education in the Norwegian language? And Karlspar, who's Karlspar? It's one of the unemployment office guys. He says that Ukrainians are here temporarily and will return to Ukraine eventually. The dilemma is how much to invest in such a group. That's a bold claim. I mean, let's say the war ended. If the war ends in 2025, I guess a lot of the Ukrainians would return. If it goes on for like 2 or 3 more years before it's like, quote, safe to return, I think you're going to have a lot of like, oh, well, but now we're settled here, right? And they're going to do like family reunion schemes and bring their husbands over or something.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I don't know what they think they're going to go back to, but maybe there will be some harsher, relocation policy, because I assume that they're working to some extent, but I don't know if you have any tables on like the amount of welfare they consume here. That would also be interesting because I assume those numbers are quite high.
Probably, yeah. Let's see. It's not that easy in small municipalities. It may not be certain that everyone has the Norwegian education and the language education adapted to the needs of the individual well enough. They're talking about how you can learn on the job. Getting people, I understand that, like getting people into jobs quickly really helps with the language. Makes sense. So I guess the main takeaway is they're not doing as well as we'd hoped, but they're doing a lot better than a lot of other groups, right? All right. We're getting up on 1.5 hours. I think it's time to round off.
Yep. It was a good stream.
Anything you want to say before we leave?
Are we getting Nomad next week? Or is that going to be another...
Let me check.
Yeah, I think it is.
Sorry about this. July 3rd. Yes, that should be a Nomad who wanted to talk to us a little bit about the goings on in the Middle East, Iran and Israel. Take a bit of a historical perspective. We had to push him back because we'd already committed to reactionary reading law this week, but we always like to have a bit of a broader perspective. So I think that works out fine. They didn't end up nuking each other, so I think we're good on that front.
Nothing ever happens. So
Nothing.
I guess
nothing
something.
didn't
But
happen.
that might change within a week. Then maybe the nukes are back on again. I mean,
We're not
you never know. It's a
necessarily,
very precarious.
Yeah, we're
word.
not necessarily through through it all yet. So we'll see. Maybe by next week it'll be extremely relevant. So I find that, us deciding to usually wait a week on some things tends to pay off more than it hurts. Not necessarily in the numbers, of course, but at least in terms of the discussion, right?
Yeah, the quality of the information that you have when you discuss it, so you don't have to sit and jump on with just small bits and pieces and try to create some BS narrative that's disproven 2 hours later. you see enough of that, I think. So it's good to have a little bit of time.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week as always. And until then, have a great evening and a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Yep. Goodbye.